Okay, good evening one more time. This is the last class that we'll be going through Genesis tonight. Finished it up. Sunday morning, Gardner scheduled to speak to this group, so look forward to that. Before I start, let me tell you thank you for allowing me to be up here this quarter. It's been enjoyable working with Jeff. Jeff's out sick tonight, but I talk about it. Maybe he's watching online. We'll see. But enjoy working with him. I always have two objectives when I teach class. Number one is what I say scriptural. And number two is it been beneficial in some way to the people who are hearing what I had to say? And I'm never totally sure about either one of those. But I'm hoping in both cases that what I said to this quarter has been scriptural, and I hope in some way that it's been beneficial to you. So I appreciate the opportunity. Tonight I'm going to go through Genesis 3 times. The first time will be the chapter content, same thing that you wrote out on your paper if you numbered it at 1 to 50 and wrote the chapter content out. May or may not exactly match mine, it doesn't matter, because there's several things in some chapters you can pick from. But we'll go through that, and then we'll go through and look at some of the sins that are listed in the book. And then maybe some lessons. The third time we'll go through and see if we find some lessons and review some of that for us. And then if we have time, we'll add some more stuff after that. But we'll do those three. Shouldn't take that much too long. So what I ask for you tonight is, as we go through this, think back through the quarter and just let your mind go through the book as we go. So if we go, particularly when we get to chapter 12 with Abraham, where the narrative follows Abraham's family, in your mind, walk through the book and think about the events we talked about during this quarter. So we'll start off with chapter 1, of course, is the creation and all the events that went on with that. Chapter 2, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Put there, of course, we have the marriage law at the end of it. Chapter in verse 24. Chapter 3, we find the first sin between Cain and Abel. When they ate the forbidden fruit. And then chapter 4, that is the story of Cain and Abel. And Cain killing Abel because of the sacrifice that he offered. Chapter 5 is just more of a kind of a catch-up chapter. It's the generations going from Adam's time into Abraham. Into Noah. Chapter 6, we find a very, very wicked world, so God decides to destroy it. Regrets that he had made man. And talks to his righteous servant Noah, has him build the ark. Chapter 7 then is the flood that comes on the earth. And chapter 8, the waters recede. The ark lands on Mount Ararat. Chapter 9, there are several promises made and things given that are new to us. One is meat was given for food. Seems the first time that everything else before this had been vegetation they were eating. And now they're eating meat for food. The promise of the rainbow. God said, I'll never destroy the earth again by water. Put the rainbow in the sky to note that promise. Capital punishment. Life for life is mentioned. Blood for blood. And then we have the sin of Noah, where he made the vineyard and got drunk from it. Chapter 10 then gives us the generations of Noah to bring us up to the time of Abraham. Chapter 11 is the Tower of Babel, where the people were going to build the tower, make a name for themselves, and God went down and confused the language and scattered the people out over the face of the earth. Chapter 12, we get into the life of Abraham and the call God gave to him to come into the land he would show him. So the promises are made to him, the 3 promises of the land, the seed, and make a great nation from him. He went into Egypt, where he lied about Sarah being his wife. 13, his nephew Lot has been with him, and herds get so big, there's not room for both of them. So we have the separation of Abraham and Lot, and their herdsmen and their flocks. Lot pitched his tent towards Sodom. Chapter 14, Lot gets taken off in a battle, 5 kings versus 4 kings. And then Abraham takes 318 trained servants of war from his household and goes and rescues Lot. And you might mention Melchizedek if you had that chapter also. Chapter 15, we have God's covenant with Abraham, the promises God made to him. 16 is the birth of Ishmael, where Sarah gave her handmaid Hagar to Abraham to have the offspring, since she was not having a child. Chapter 17 is important. It's the covenant of circumcision. So circumcision, which would follow all the way through the Jewish nation and be an issue when we get to Acts 15 in the New Testament, starts in chapter 17 of Genesis. 18, there are 3 strangers that come up. Abraham shows them hospitality and then has the session with the bargaining over the destruction of Sodom. 19 then is the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot escaping, and then his incest with his daughters. Chapter 20, Abimelech. 21, then God fulfills the promise then, an heir from Abraham through Sarah, and have the birth of Isaac. 22, Abraham is told to go offer Isaac as a burnt offering. He complies with that, goes to do it. God tests his faith, and Abraham obeys God in what he does. Chapter 23 is where Sarah dies. Abraham finds a burial place for her in the cave of Machpelah, buys that piece of land, and there'll be several more people, as we've seen already, buried there. Chapter 24, he sends his most faithful servant back to the homeland, to his own people, to get a wife for Isaac. Isaac then, we also have the prayers of that servant as he goes back and meets Rebekah and brings her back to be a wife for Isaac. They then have children, Jacob and Esau. A lot about them are covered in that one chapter, from their birth to their manhood. And 26, Isaac and Abimelech. 27 is where Jacob gets the blessing from Isaac instead of Esau. And Esau then weeps because he missed the blessing. Of course, already had the birthright being sold earlier. 28, because of this, Jacob leaves, goes back to home country. His mom sends him back there, says be gone for a few days. It turned out to be 20 years. Goes back to Laban. On the way, he has a dream of the ladder to heaven. 29, after working for Laban for 7 years, thinking he's getting Rachel, he gets Leah. Then he gets Rachel and works 7 more years for her. Chapter 30, we're told about the children being born to the handmaids and to Jacob's wives, Rachel and Leah, and his expanse of his flock that he has. And also the blessings that are on Laban because of Jacob being there and God being with him. Chapter 31 is where Jacob tells his wives it's time to leave. The attitude of Laban toward them has changed. It's time to go back to the land that God had promised him. And so they leave Laban. Chapter 32, on the way back, as they camp there near the fords of the Jabbok, Jacob wrestles with God. He touches his hip. He limps on it after that. 33 then, he very fearfully meets Esau, afraid of what Esau would do with him for revenge, for getting the birthright and the blessing. Turns out Esau does not cause any trouble. 34 is the defilement or rape of Dinah, daughter of Jacob, and the revenge taken on because of that. 35, we have the death of Rachel and of Isaac, two more that were buried in that same cave. Well, Rachel was not, I'm sorry. Rachel's buried on the way to Bethlehem. Isaac's buried in the cave of Machpelah. 36 just lists Esau and his descendants and what happened to various parts of his family. And then he kind of drops out the picture then. 37, we have Joseph. We're introduced to Joseph as the favorite son. And we learn of the dreams that he had about the sheaves bowing down to him and the sun and moon and stars bowing down, which will come into play, of course, as we get later into that story. So Joseph's dreams. And then 38, Judah and Tamar, Tamar being his daughter-in-law, who he was supposed to give to his youngest son after the two older sons died at the hand of the Lord, and he did not do it. So Tamar dressed like a harlot, and Judah went into her. 39, Joseph sold and to Potiphar's care in Egypt by his brothers. And we have the temptation from Potiphar's wife, and then her lying about him and getting him put back into prison. In the prison, then he meets the butler and the baker, Pharaoh's two men who had been put there because of Pharaoh's displeasure with them. They have dreams, and the butler is restored to his place. The baker is hanged on a tree 3 days later on Pharaoh's birthday. Chapter 41 then, 2 years have passed, and Pharaoh has dreams, which made the butler remember Joseph, his interpretation. So Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams about the famine from the fat cows, the lean cows, and the fat heads of grain, and the lean ones. Joseph then, having been put in charge of all the grain, taken up grain during the years of plenty, and now his brothers come down from Israel, where the famine is also hard, to buy grain, not knowing they're buying it from Joseph. So they come down to buy grain. Joseph recognizes them. They do not recognize him. Chapter 43, they come back for a second time. This is when Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. As they leave this time, Joseph has his silver cup put in Benjamin's sack. So they have to come back and beg for it, not be put in prison, and to be able to go back and take Benjamin back to their father. And Joseph then reveals himself to his brothers. 45, I am Joseph. I am the one you sold into slavery. You meant it to me for evil, but God sent me here to preserve life. So in chapter 46, he sends back and gets his father and all the other relatives and brings them into Egypt. Promise made to Abraham way back before that they would be in servitude for 400 years. This is the beginning of that. They settle in the land of Goshen. Tell Pharaoh they're shepherds, which separates them from the Egyptians and keeps them separate. And if you get on into the book of Exodus and start reading there, all the plagues came on the Egyptians, did not come on the Israelites in the land of Goshen. So that separation that we're seeing here has an effect when you get into the book of Exodus and the plagues start coming in. Chapter 48, Joseph takes his sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, to put them in age order into his father Jacob to be blessed, and Ephraim the younger gets the blessing from Jacob. 49 is where Jacob tells the future of each one of his sons. The one that's particularly of interest to us is Judah, because through him Christ would come with the tribe of Judah. Then chapter 50 is the death of Joseph. They put his bones in a coffin. He says, take my bones out of here with you when you leave. So your list may be somewhere close to that as you went through and listed the 50 chapters out. So let's go through it again now, and this time look at it, some of the sins we run across as we go through the narrative of Genesis. I won't get all of them, but there's some of them. And again, just let your mind flow through the book as we go here. Chapter 3, they're in the garden, and they have the forbidden fruit that God told them not to eat of, the tree of life. They did. Satan tempted Eve, and she took it and ate and gave to her husband Adam, and he did eat. And in both cases it said, and I ate. So each one of them did it. Chapter 4, we have Cain killing Abel. We talked about the hatred, the anger that he got there because of the acceptance of his brother's sacrifice instead of his, and eventually he murders him then. Chapter 6 is with the wickedness that's in the world, sons of God marrying the daughters of men, and God decides to destroy the earth because of all the wickedness. Chapter 9 we mentioned earlier. This is where Noah comes out of the ark, builds a vineyard, gets drunk, and lays uncovered. And Ham goes in and sees this. Yeah. And the disrespect that's shown there. Chapter 11 is arrogance, self-glory, as they try to build this tower, make a name for themselves. God comes down and confuses their language. Chapter 12, we have Abraham in Egypt, lying about Sarah being his wife. And then we have the faithlessness and disbelief in God by Sarah, and the promise that she would have Abraham would have an heir. So she gives Hagar to Abraham to bear a son. Chapter 18, Sarah laughed. I say she didn't laugh when it was said that she would bear a child in her old age. Chapter 19 was Sodom, the homosexuality, the drunkenness, incest of Lot and his daughters. Very, very, very sad chapter from chapter 19. 20 is Abraham and Abimelech lying again about his wife in that chapter. Chapter 25, Esau profaned his birthright, treated it as something worthless. It was something special. That's what the word profane essentially means. It's the way he treated it. Chapter 26, Isaac did the same thing that his father had done, a lot about his wife, said she was his sister. 27, Jacob gets the blessing, but he does it with the conniving of his mother, lying and deceit, and then the hatred that comes out of his brother Esau. 28, Rachel takes the idol when they leave Laban and start to go back to the land of Israel. And then she stole it, and then the deceit when Laban came looking for it, when she wouldn't give it up. Chapter 34, we mentions Dinah, the defilement, essentially the rape of her, the lying and the revenge that went on, and then the murder when they went in and killed all the people of Shechem because of it. 34 is the hatred of the brothers against Joseph because he was the favorite son, the dreams he had, and then taking the coat into their father, deceiving him by saying, "Is this your son's coat?" So we got hatred and deceit. 38, of course, is adultery between Judah and Tamar. And then 39, Potiphar's wife and the seduction, and then the lying that she did when Joseph refused to be with her. So that's some of the sins that we're going to cross in the book of Genesis. Let's go it one more time. This time, let's look for some lessons and think about some lessons for us. Lesson 3, we talked about the creation. God's greatness, his ability to speak the word that came into existence, the magnificence of that. When he looked at it all over, he had said it was very good. And then we mentioned earlier at the end of chapter 2, we have God's general law for marriage. Man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. This is lessons now we had, not chapter, this is lesson 5, Cain and Abel. And we learned from that the importance of God, worshiping God the way he told us to, not trying to do it our way. And then God tells Cain he has a choice. Sin lies at the door. If you have a choice, you can rule over it. And we have that same challenge to us. When sin lies at the door, we can rule over it. Cain didn't. So the challenge is, will we? 6 is the marriages that went on that led to the wickedness. So we're talking about spouse selection a little bit. And then twice, at the end of chapter 6 and the beginning of chapter 7, it said Noah did all God commanded him in building the ark. Quite a lesson for us to do all God has commanded us. Tower of Babel, self-glory instead of giving God the glory. Chapter 8, Abraham was looking for a city whose foundation and maker is God. Read that over in Hebrews chapter 11. But he left on a journey, not knowing where he's going. And God guide him. God direct him. Lesson 9, coming back from the battle, Abraham meets Melchizedek and gives him 1/10 of all the spoils that he took in the battle. Gives us a chance to think about our giving. We don't do the tithing or the 10th anymore. But lesson 10, we talked about God told Abraham a son's coming. And we get thinking about faith. The faith that Abraham had and what God told him, the promises he made to him. With Lot and the visitors, sinful means do not justify an end. Remember when Lot was going to give his daughters to the men of the city to try to satisfy them and have them not try to take the men, the visitors, out and have defiled times with them. But that sinful act of giving his daughters to them is not proper justification of what he's trying to accomplish. Sin does not override sin. Sin is still sin. Sin is always sin. Lot, you can't give your daughters out to try to accomplish something else. Homosexuality is sin. Get that lesson out of that. So much so that God destroyed the city. Lesson 11, she's my sister. Abraham, Isaac later did it because of the fear of their life, their physical life. But lying is lying. And lying's wrong. Lying's always wrong. There's no justification for it. In the offering of Isaac, It's the importance of obeying God. Oops. The importance of obeying God. We talked about it then. You can imagine what it'd be like to tell Abraham to go take your son, your only son, the one you love, and offer him as a sacrifice. Abraham did it. Total faith. And if instead that's the son through which the promise will come, Abraham didn't know how it's going to happen, but God took care of it. Confidence in God's promises. And going to seek a wife for Isaac, we met Rebekah. She's watered all of his camels. All they wanted. Talk about working. And he prayed 3 different times. The servant did of Abraham's. 3 different times he prayed to God during that little episode of selecting a wife for Isaac, meeting Rebekah. Jacob leaves Laban. God had promised Jacob, I'll be with you. I'll bring you back to this land. God keeps his promises. Jacob meeting Esau. Repentance. Last time they were together, Esau was going to kill him. But now they meet, and he offers to go with him and be essentially his bodyguard or help. See, he's going back. Jacob says, no, we got it. I got the little ones. They can't go fast. You go ahead. Defilement of Dinah. The young man wondered. He wondered right then. And then he tells his daddy, go get her for my wife. And then the revenge that the brothers took. Simeon and Levi. Then Joseph sold. We get hatred. You see, jealousy. Certainly things that warn us about those. Peer pressure, the brothers working together. And then Joseph's faithfulness under just terrible circumstances. No indication at all from God that Joseph ever wandered away from what God would have him do. The brothers meet Joseph. Joseph knows that certainly they meant it to him for evil, as we said earlier. But God's in control. He put him there for a purpose. And then sins will be found out. Those brothers realize that, there's a reckoning now. This is Joseph. This is the one we sold. And look at his position. And what can he do to us? And we sin. We may think it's done and gone. We sold Joseph into Egypt, and it's gone, and we ain't got to worry about it. But sin's going to come back and haunt us. Our sins will be found out. Joseph reveals himself, and we get a major lesson on forgiveness. Joseph could have taken revenge. That's the next thing. After Jacob dies, the brothers were very fearful that Joseph would want revenge. And he certainly could have. But we don't see that at all out of him. So 2 lessons there. Forgiveness and the fact that revenge belongs to God. Okay, I want to stop for a minute and get any input that you have, something you think about that might think about the whole book in itself or some particular thing from tonight. Anybody got any? This is your last chance to speak. Any comments from anybody about the book? Anything we've covered anytime during the quarter or whatever? Mighty quiet group.
When in Genesis 6, God did not destroy the earth, it was just the people.
Yes. Yeah. God destroyed all living beings, animals, people, whatever. Yes. When he destroyed the earth, the flood. Thanks, Freddie. Okay, if you don't have anything, I got one more, and we'll take time to do this, and maybe one of the periods of Bible history that we did in the very first class, but I'm going to do a little bit different way this time. We'll do it by looking at maps. So think about where people are during the 17 periods of Bible history. So in Genesis 1 through 5 is the first period, the period before the flood. And they are in the Garden of Eden, which we think was probably somewhere down in this area. And then the period of the flood, waters cover the earth, just talking about here from Genesis chapter 6. And then the ark lands on the mountains of Ararat after the flood waters recede. Next period is the scattering of the people, and they go back down, and we see it in the land of Shinar, which again we think is back down that general area where the Garden of Eden was. So we have the Tower of Babel, Genesis chapter 11, the scattering of the people, the third period of, as we break it out in our 17 periods. Next comes the Patriarchs, which takes the rest of the book of Genesis. We've talked about Abraham. Leaves Ur, goes up to Haran, then down to Canaan, eventually goes down in Egypt, so he lies about Sarah. So we have the Patriarchs, and the land of Canaan's land of promise. 3 patriarchs then, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Seems like Joseph ought to go on that list. We spent so much time talking about him, but he is not. He was the link to get it into Egypt. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob there. Joseph takes us down into Egypt. Then we have the Exodus. Pharaoh arose who did not know Joseph, and 400 years pass. God raises up Moses then to go in and lead the people out, brings the plagues on Pharaoh, and eventually after the death of the firstborn, they leave, they come out and cross the Red Sea and go down to Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai, they're given the covenant, the law, the tabernacle, and the priesthood. Went down, about 70 people came out with an estimate of approximately 650,000 men of war, I think it was. Wandering in the wilderness because they went up to Kadesh Barnea, and the spies were sent out and came back with a report. 10 of them said, we can't take it. So they have 40 years to wander in the wilderness. Several things happened there. Miriam and Aaron, Moses sins, Balaam and Balak, and then Joshua is appointed to take the leadership, and Moses dies. After they've conquered the east side, Moses goes up on Mount Nebo, and he sees into the land, and God buries him there. Joshua takes them into the promised land then. The invasion and conquest is the next period. They go in and take the central part of the country and down to the southern part, and then up and take the northern part. So 3 campaigns, if you will, to conquer the land. And then the land is divided to different tribes, and the land promise is fulfilled. Then we have the period of the judges, the 4 R's that I use: rebellion, repression, repentance, the rescue, kind of a repetitive cycle there. And then it rounds up in 1 Samuel chapter 8, we want a king to be like the nations around us. So God gives them a king, Saul, then David, and Solomon, the 3 kings of the United Kingdom. The kingdom divides after the death of Solomon. Jeroboam's in the north with 10 tribes. All the kings of Israel, the northern kingdom, were evil, all of them. In the south, Judah has 2 tribes under Solomon's son Rehoboam, and there are a few good kings scattered through that history there. Israel is taken away into Assyrian captivity, which leaves, in 721, leaves Judah alone. And then Judah is taken away into Babylonian captivity, 606 BC. 70 years of captivity there. They start the return under Zerubbabel. Come back in 3 waves: Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah. Return captivity, and then have the years of silence. period when God did not speak to them, and the life of Christ, divided into 7 periods, years of preparation, the beginning of his ministry, great Galilean ministry, the periods of retirement, the close of the ministry, and then last week, and then his resurrection and exaltation. We begin the period of the early church. Message spreads from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria, and from there it's going out to all the world. The missionary journeys of Paul, the gospel goes to Asia Minor, and he starts writing the letters to the Christians. Crosses the Aegean Sea into Greece, Macedonia, Paul, Silas, Timothy, Luke travel, and then we have the letters written by Peter, Paul, James, Jude, and John. So a little different approach to looking at the 17 periods as you look at the maps and where things happen there. So that's the end of it. I think it's time for the bell. I appreciate your attention. Appreciate the quarter. Thank you.
Just for a few moments, have a few things I want you to consider, and after that we'll have the Lord's invitation. There's a quote that says, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. And I think that's a good motivational quote. Doesn't have to be a spiritual one. But for instance of tonight, we're going to use it as a spiritual motivational quote. And I think we can see where places in the scriptures kind of echo these sentiments. First one I wanted to bring up was Paul's exhortation to Timothy in 2 Timothy 4, verses 1 and 2, which he says, I charge you therefore before God and the Lord Jesus Christ, who will judge the living and the dead at his appearing and his kingdom. Preach the word, be ready in season and out of season. Convince, rebuke, exhort with all longsuffering and teaching. So the idea there, stay ready to Timothy to teach and preach. Maybe one that speaks more to us is in the Gospels. There's parallel passages that talk about how no one but God knows when the Son of Man is coming. First, turn to Matthew chapter 24. So in Matthew 24, again, he's talking about how no one knows when the Son of Man is coming except for God. And he says, just like in the days of Noah, they were eating, they were drinking, they were marrying, and then the flood came. So it was just their everyday walk of life until that time. Now let's read verses 42 through 44. It says, watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. So there, I think, 2 different times. When he says in verse 42, watch therefore, that's the idea to me, is kind of paraphrasing it and using our motivational quote, stay ready so you don't have to get ready. Watch therefore, be ready. Then down in verse 44, therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you don't expect. So stay ready. Stay ready so you don't have to be ready. Or get ready, excuse me. Now turn to Mark chapter 13. So here in Mark 13 is saying how like a master going on a journey, he leaves his servants in authority. And he uses that phrase again, watch therefore, the idea of stay ready, for we don't know what hour the master is coming. Let's look at verses 35 35 through 37. It says, "Watch therefore, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming, in the evening, at midnight, at the crowing of the rooster, or in the morning, lest coming suddenly he find you asleep. And what I say to you, I say to all, watch." So again, watch therefore. Stay ready. Be ready. Now turn to Luke chapter 12. We're going to look at verse 35. So kind of dealing with that idea of staying ready, being ready. It says, "Let your waist be girded and your lamps burning." Look down at verse 40. "Therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect." So stay ready. Now let's turn to Matthew 25. I'm kind of skipping around here. This is not an exhaustive list of the scriptures, trying to find passages talking about staying ready, being ready. But in chapter 25, the first 13 verses, a very familiar passage to us. The parable of the 10 virgins let's read it real quick, and then I've got some points to make off of it. It says, "Then the kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish. Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them, but the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. But while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight a cry was heard, 'Behold, the bridegroom is coming, and go out to meet him.' Then all those virgins arose, they trimmed their lamps, and the foolish said to the wise, 'Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out.' But the wise answered, saying, 'No, lest there should be not enough for us and you, but go rather to those who sell and buy for yourselves.' And while they went out to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins came also, saying, 'Lord, Lord, open to us.' But he answered and said, 'Assuredly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, stay ready, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming.'" So, I think we can all see that, of those 10 virgins, all of them took their lamps. So they're kind of ready. But 5 of them, the foolish ones, weren't fully ready. They were ready at one point, but maybe they fell asleep, they slumbered, they slept, and they allowed themselves to get in a state of not being ready. Whereas the wise virgins, they stayed ready. They were prepared. They even had time to sleep and slumber and still be ready. Perhaps they didn't let their guard down. Watch therefore, the idea of staying ready. Now, kind of going away from the scriptures, many of you know that I had the privilege of getting to work with my father. As a salesman, he traveled a good bit, and he needed an assistant in the office that could get certain things done that he was unable to do while he was driving. Not saying he didn't text at times and check emails while he's driving, but there's only so much you could do, and this was years and years ago, when technology wasn't as readily available as it is now, where you can do a lot of things on the road now, but needed someone there in the office that could get things done while he was on the road. And I'm comfortable that a lot of y'all knew him, knew that he had a sharp mind, sharper than mine. But he would call, and typically in the mornings when he's traveling, he'd give me kind of a punch list of things to do in his absence. And I learned very quickly I had to take notes to keep up with him. So I'd have my sticky notes, or I'd have my notepad, and I'd make notes of what all he wanted me to get done. And at the end of the day, or near the end of the day, or sometimes after hours, he would call and ask for the feedback on the things that he gave me to do. And I'd like to act all high and mighty of all the things I got done. And on that long list, I'd showcase how much I'd got done during the day. And let's say he gave me a list of 20 things. And if I got 18 or 19 of them done, I'd go through it. And what was the one thing that he remembered? The one thing he asked about? It was the one thing that I didn't do. And luckily, he was long-suffering with me. But the idea was that I thought I was ready until he called and pointed out that I was not ready. So maybe sometimes we say we're ready, or we think we're ready, but we're really not. Let's look at Luke 22. And verses 31 through 34. So we're near the end of Jesus, before he died on the cross, before his betrayal and everything. Let's read verse 31. It says, "And the Lord says, Simon, Simon, indeed Satan has asked for you that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith should not fail. And when you have returned to me, strengthen your brethren. But he said to him, Lord, I am ready to go with you, both to prison and to death. Then he said, I tell you, Peter, the rooster shall not crow this day before you will deny me 3 times that you know me." So maybe I can kind of relate to Peter here, where he thought he was ready. He professed that he was ready. And of course, we know that he was not, and that he betrayed or denied knowing Jesus. So how does that apply to us tonight? If you've never been baptized into Christ, you've never been ready for Christ's return. Perhaps some of you here have been baptized and you've strayed, or you've gotten complacent in your spiritual life. Maybe you say you're ready. Maybe you think you're ready. I hope that this study would encourage all of you and me to do what the Scripture says. Watch therefore. The idea of stay ready so you don't have to get ready. If you're subject to the Lord's invitation, please come as we stand and sing.